Did Hillary Clinton give 20% of the United States supply of uranium to Russia for donations to the Clinton Foundation? And it flows out of the sale in 2010 of this company, enemy-1, which controlled about a fifth of America's uranium, to a Russian firm called Rosatom. Had to be approved by the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S., which is comprised of 9 agencies, including the State Department. And at that time, Hillary Clinton was the boss there. The Hill newspaper, which reports on a lot of things with the government here, came out with a report showing the FBI was investigating a subsidiary of Rosatom for possible racketeering, money laundering, bribes, all aimed at giving the Russian government more influence over the U.S. nuclear industry while this deal was being approved. The Hill says the Russians were channeling millions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation.
I think the Russian uranium story is perhaps the most shocking and most blatant example of how the Clintons operate. This is a story about the Russian State Nuclear Agency, American uranium, $145 million in cash, and the Clintons.
At the end of the day, this is a story about buying influence and selling influence. The Clintons are the sellers of influence, the Canadian investors and the Russians are the buyers.
They go from a press conference to a dinner where Frank Justra, Nazarbayev, the dictator of Kazakhstan, and Bill Clinton meet and talk.
Well, 2 days after that meeting, Frank Justra finally gets his uranium concessions
worth hundreds of millions of dollars. A couple of weeks after that, Bill Clinton gets his $30 million from Frank Justra, the first payment in what will become more than $100 million in pledges and commitments and donations made by Frank Justra. Now let's move to chapter 2 of this story, which is even more sinister. You see, the international uranium market is very competitive. The Kremlin sees dominance and control of the uranium market as a source of national power. Frank Justra takes that uranium concession he got in Kazakhstan and puts it into a company in a so-called reverse merger, which was one way for a private company to go public to form something called enemy-1. It's a company traded on the stock market in Canada, and they start acquiring uranium concessions in places like Wyoming, Texas, New Mexico, and Utah. And by 2009, they have what is expected to be 50% of future uranium production in the United States. This gets the interest of Vladimir Putin and the Russian government. And in fact, there are State Department cables that were leaked through WikiLeaks, which show that Hillary was aware of the fact that the Russians took great care to try to dominate the international uranium market.
Well, the Russians want to buy this asset, and they offer a 40% overprice on the share of the stock. And for this transaction to go through, it has to be approved by the U.S. federal government. Why? Because uranium is regarded as a critical industry in the United States.
After all, this is used for our civilian nuclear reactors and goes into nuclear weapons. So it goes before the federal government, where it needs to be signed off by a series of federal agencies, including the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. As Hillary Clinton is contemplating this, shareholders in enemy-1, including Frank Justra, have sent more than $145 million to the Clinton Foundation. The chairman of that company at the precise time is a guy named Ian Telfer, who is also making donations to the Clinton Foundation, as is Frank Holmes, who is another major enemy-1 shareholder.
And Hillary Clinton, who has a record of opposing precisely these kinds of deals, comes out and says, you know what, I think this is a good deal. Let's let Vladimir Putin take control of what is now 20% of U.S. uranium production.
What's so interesting when you consider this uranium deal are the actions of a small Canadian investment firm called Salida Capital. Salida Capital, in 2010, as this deal was going down, committed to give millions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation, and they also sponsored a speech by Bill Clinton in Canada. Salida Capital is also the name of a wholly owned subsidiary of Rosatom. Who is Rosatom? Well, this is the government agency in Russia that controls their nuclear arsenal, that built nuclear reactors in Iran, and engages in nuclear technology exchanges with rogue countries like North Korea. What this means, in essence, is that the Russian government, specifically Rosatom, was funneling money through a subsidiary directly to the Clinton Foundation. But the payday didn't end there. 4 months before Hillary Clinton's State Department would sign off on the Russian purchase of uranium-1, Bill Clinton got paid $500,000 to give a single speech in Moscow. He was being paid by a firm called Renaissance Capital, which has a long history of association with Russian intelligence services. What makes this speech stand out is not only the timing of when he's being paid, but the amount that he's being paid. You see, the last time Bill Clinton gave a speech in Russia was 5 years earlier. At that time, he was paid about 1/3 of what he was being paid this time.
Why is Russian control of 20% of U.S. uranium so troubling?
If you're in an era where nuclear weapons are a reality, where nuclear energy is an important component of energy production in the United States, and increasingly around the world, control of uranium is absolutely crucial. And unlike oil or natural gas can be found in so many places around the world, there are precious few places where you can find significant and large amounts of uranium that you can produce on a commercial scale. What we've essentially done is handed this precious resource to Vladimir Putin and the Russian government.